Welcome to this meditation and talk. I'm Jonathan Foust, and I'm glad to have you here for this webcast. What follows are a few announcements, a little meditation, and an introduction to the following, which is a part 2 Q&A with Tara and myself. First of all, big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this whole thing. A big thank you to Glenn Harrison, our producer, for making this possible. Another big thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader. At 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, you can join her for mindful movement, which will bring you right up to this. And you can get that link on my Facebook page or on my website. I have a newsletter which you can sign up for, where I offer my best photography, with a compendium of my talks and a weekly, if you like. And finally, this is all offered freely. No one is to be denied access to these teachings, which is one of the core tenets of Buddhist practice. I got very inspired by that. So there's no paywall, there's no ads, there's nothing. If anyone is interested, it's here. If you'd like to support me in making this possible, I really do appreciate your support, and I thank you for that. Finally, in terms of next big thing, I am offering my Year of Living Mindfully program starting in September. So all drawn on this whole idea that company is stronger than willpower. And it's a very deep dive into sustaining practice. It's a deep dive into somatic inquiry, which is a very in-depth transformative practice unto itself, and an exploration of what it means to really draw on like-minded people and community. Applications are due June 1st. So if you're interested, you can check that out on my website. Be happy to have you as part of this cohort. I guess that's it. So let us move into our practice. If you like, take a couple minutes to adjust your posture in any way that feels good to you. You might like to bring your arms up overhead, taking a few long and full deep breaths as you stretch your arms up overhead and just reach up to the left side and through the right side. We'll do one of my favorite transitions for meditation. As you know, so much of practice is about bringing attention to the body. So if you like, you can shake out your hands. If anyone is watching, let them be really confused. And if you shake out your hands like you're flinging water off the fingertips, a little bit more vigorous. And then bring your hands so they're just facing up right about just at face level. And then if you like, close your eyes and let your attention just flood into the palms and the fingers and thumbs. And sense how if you relax the thumbs and fingers, you can turn your attention to the perception of subtle energy. You might feel this as tingling or inner vibration. Perhaps you can feel the pulse. And in your own way, just notice the presence of life, of energy. Can you feel or imagine the space between your right thumb and your right forefinger? Can you feel or imagine the space between your left thumb and your left forefinger? Can you feel or imagine the space between each of the fingers on both hands? And if you like, you can use the following absorption technique as a segue to your meditation practice. Imagine if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement. And as you're ready, let your hands begin an ultra slow motion descent down toward your lap. And again, imagine if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement. And internally, just sense the smallest unit of movement that you can perceive. And as you do so, could you soften the muscles of your face? Could you relax the tongue? Wherever you find your hands, whether they're in transit or whether they've come to rest, you might keep your attention here in this felt sense in the palms and fingers and thumbs. This anchor for your attention. And you might, in your own way, just scanning from the crown of the head down through the heels. Is there anything inside that could relax or soften right now? Is there anything inside that could relax or soften even more than that? You might very gently bring your attention to an anchor of your choosing. Perhaps it's the movement of the breath on the inside. Or you might elect to focus your attention on the sound vibrations. Or maybe again back to the felt sense in the palms, fingers, and thumbs. Whatever you select, breath, sound, or the feeling in the palms. Sense what it's like to invite your attention again and again and again to relax and to feel and to experience the energy, the vibration right here at this point of contact. What is the quality of presence right now? Sensing the quality of inner relaxation, quality of mind. Is it possible to sense who you are as the observer, as the one who is aware of what is changing? In these remaining minutes, you might refresh your practice. Is there anything that could soften or relax inside right now? If you bring your attention to your anchor of breath or sound or the felt sense in the palms, how intimately can you feel right here at this point of contact? Can you sense this quality of the witness, the observer? You might shift your attention, only if it feels right for you, from any sense of effort or doing to relax back even more into a sense of being. Imagine all effort now melting away. And yet, this quality of attention, awareness, vibrant and alert. Noticing the sense of flow, sensations, thoughts, moods, states, all shifting like weather patterns. Allowing it all to flow, and yet at the same time, to be intimately awake to what is changing. Is it possible to let things be exactly as they are right now? You might gently now begin to deepen your breath. Feel free to invite in any movement that feels good for you as you begin your transition. Welcome back. There are so many ways to practice meditation, and it's very easy to get hung up in thinking there's one right way. What I find is that our practices tend to evolve over time. They sort of shift to the natural wanting to cultivate different qualities of attention, ranging from concentration to your capacity to monitor what's changing, to your capacity to truly surrender and let things be, to your practice of turning attention on awareness itself. In that light, what follows is part 2 of questions and a couple answers as Tara and I take on questions that people have submitted about their practice. I hope you find this helpful, and so many blessings in your practice. Take good care.
Welcome, friends. Namaste. I'm so glad you're with us. So last May, I invited questions for an Ask Me Anything, and hundreds of really, really cool questions came in. And so we did one session. I did it with Jonathan Foust, my husband. And, it was kind of an interview conversation. And of course, we only got to a handful. So we wanted to do another round and just explore some of the themes you all brought up. So here we are. Jonathan, as I mentioned, is my husband, a teaching partner, and like myself, offers weekly talks and meditations on his podcast, as well as half-day and day-long workshops and retreats. You can find out more about him at jonathanfoust.com. So welcome, dear.
Well, thank you, honey. It's great to be here.
How's the weather over on your side of the house?
It's always a little cooler on this side.
It's probably because I have my heat blasting at 85 here.
Something like that.
Yeah.
We've got some great questions. So I think we got a really good kind of loaded session here ahead of us.
Jump on in.
All right. Well, we'll just dive in. So here's the first one. How can we be mindful and present in all our moments? I can't imagine trying to keep mindful of my breath or sounds or sensations and getting anything done.
Yeah. So how do we be mindful right here as we're talking to each other and onward? It's a really wonderful question. And the main thing that helps me is to think of mindfulness as a very flexible lens, and you can widen it and you can narrow it. So it might be in a formal sitting practice that it's a much more narrow focused lens, more microscopic, where you're really attending to and investigating the breath or sound or the emotions of the moment. It's just like that, much more focused. And then during the day, the lens can widen and still aware of what's going on, but, more comprehensive. It's a more broad, receptive kind of attention. And it helps me to keep remembering that mindfulness doesn't arise when there's a tense kind of effort. It's more of a relaxing back kind of presence, to be mindful in the midst of doing. So if you're walking, be aware, okay, walking, feeling the sensations. If you're showering, if you're just aware of showering, if you're cleaning or paying bills or whatever you're doing, responding to email, just having that background witnessing awareness of, okay, so this is what's happening. So right now, as I'm speaking and I'm seeing you, Jonathan, it's just to have that kind of awareness in the background that this is what is happening in the moment. And what helps me is to slow down. I mean, in the moments of slowing down, I come back here more, pausing. It helps me during the day to take breaks from screens. I mean, that's just the rule of thumb. Just get away from a screen and reground in your body. Years ago, I had, there was this meditation mem that said, don't just do something, sit there, that kind of thing. And clearly we're going to be engaged in doing, and we can do it mindfully. So, Jonathan, your comments.
Well, it's so interesting, and I think there's so much of a question around like what's skillful, like what is the state I'm trying to invoke? Like, the folly of multitasking. It's really clear that when you try to do five things simultaneously, it's just not very effective. So realizing that I can choose to narrow the lens, focus on one thing at a time, and then get the satisfaction. And actually, there's a certain kind of joy that comes when I can focus. And then other times when it's, as you said, it's more natural to kind of widen your attention and you become more aware of like being the open monitor of what's changing. And then that whole idea of wide open awareness. And like one of my favorite things of like being at the ocean is actually like watching people who are sitting on the beach, because they're pretty much all kind of sitting there like this. Like the sky, the horizon, that sense of like wide open spaciousness. And I think that's one of the powerful things about practice is that we can actually narrow the lens and widen the lens. Sometimes we actually have the ability to be aware of how we're wanting to focus, whether it be narrow or more wide open.
I love that reminder of one thing at a time, because it's so rare nowadays. And we're so habituated to fracturing our attention and multitasking. And there's so much research on how when we do that, there's nothing that we're doing that we bring as much intelligence or creativity to. So I just wanted to toss that back in. And also, you have a great kind of mantra story about doing, and how, the importance of being also, that I kind of wanted to invite forward. And
Can you remind me what it is?
it had to do with Frank Sinatra.
Oh no. Right. Yes, it was Sartre who said to be is to do. And it was Camus who said to do is to be. And then it all got summed up so beautifully by Frank Sinatra when he came forward with doobie doobie doo. Yes.
Sorry,
Thank
I
you for
couldn't.
eliciting the depth of that teaching. I really appreciate it.
I knew there was something in there. I just couldn't remember. Thank you.
But the other thing is though, like there's so much around like this elusive flow state, and it's really interesting when you look at the components of the flow state. It really is through absorption. It is through that sense of like remove the distractions, get immersed, and something I try to remember when I see my 85 emails. So here's another question on meditation. It seems meditation is about quieting thoughts, but don't we need to think? Don't we have to plan the future, be goal-oriented, figure out how to get from here to there, or from there to here?
For sure. Thinking is essential for surviving and flourishing. And it's part of spiritual practice and wise reflection. I'm thinking now to respond to this question. And our brain is a predicting machine. It's just part of the way we're wired, and we're wired to lean into the future. We're regularly computing what will happen and how to proceed. And we have a map in our mind with an idea of what's going on right here and an idea of the future and some sense of a path. So that's just part of what guides us in navigating. And I mean, just to think of what it means if we're regularly living inside that map of a future, because then life feels like we're always on our way somewhere, that we're not actually right here. You might reflect, those of you listening right now, if that's true for you, how much you're actually sensing that you're on your way someplace else. And then what do we miss when we're moving towards some future goal and we're not right here? I think often about this story that came out in the Washington Post. This is years ago now, of a man was playing a violin in the subway, and thousands of people passed by him that morning. And the only ones that stopped were children. And it turned out that that man was a very famous musician, Joshua Bell, and really super talented. And this was a social science research project of the Washington Post to see how many people would stop when they were on their way someplace else and really take in the magic of what he was offering. Our habit is to be on our way somewhere. And so we have to set goals, we have to think, we have to plan, and we also need mindfulness and full presence so that we can sense when it's too much and when we're right here, this moment is the place to be. Most of our planning and our thoughts are pretty fear-driven. We overdo it. And I always think of that little story of the woman who sends her son an email, and the email says, "Start worrying, details to follow." So nice to come back right here and know when not to be caught up in the planning and that map of the mind. So, Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I have something to add to that story about Joshua Bell, because everyone walked by except for children, except for one person, Stacy Furukawa, who happened to be a meditation a practitioner of meditation, who was part of the meditation group at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington. So there is something about mindfulness and being aware, which I thought was kind of cool.
Ooh, I like it. Well, I mean, we have a ritual, you and I, that we'll often go for walks and we'll have that meandering kind of conversation. And often we're planning and thinking and so on. But there are times that we'll absolutely stop and stand still and look at each other. And I'll say something like, "This is it, right here, right now. This is it." And then you'll go, "No, no, no.
No.
This is
this.
this right now."
Sorry, it's this.
So it makes a difference to just know we're going to be inclined to planning and thinking ahead, and the real preciousness is right here now.
Well, it's just to acknowledge Ram Dass, who famously said, the mind, is a wonderful servant and a lousy master. That this amazing prediction machine, which can be of service and which can kind of torture us at the same time. And I think there is something very powerful, about inquiry, about using the kind of questions that can elicit thoughts that can help us solve problems and do all kinds of things. And if I have a project ahead of me, I'll ask myself, "Oh, how do I want to feel at the end of this?" And quite often, the thoughts that follow that question can actually provide me some really interesting insights.
I'm right there with you. There's a power to that. And there's also a power to the inquiry of, if there's no future, if I'm not on my way to something else, who am I? What's really true? And you might even just imagine that as you listen, if there's no problem to solve, if there's no goal to get to, if there's no future, who am I? So this is a domain that deserves our attention. We know we need to set goals. We know thinking's part of survival, and how to drop it all.
So this question is actually right along these lines of practice and being aware of the mind. I've been practicing meditation on and off. And most of the time when I sit, I'm restless. I plan my day or I worry about things. I have such a busy mind, and I don't think I'll get rid of all this thinking. Is it possible I'm just not cut out for meditation?
Mm. You know, there's a meditation master who was once asked to describe the world, and his response was lost in thought. And that came to mind because this isn't, for you who's asking that question, this isn't your personal predicament. I mean, most of us have busy minds and spend a lot of time lost in thought. I mean, if you think about the last day or the last few hours and where were you, it's a lot of virtual reality thinking. And so thinking's part of surviving and thriving, and we overdo it. We're addicted to thinking. And the purpose of meditation is not to get rid of thinking. And if we think we're trying to we think we're trying to eliminate thoughts, we'll be at war with our mind for the rest of our lives, basically. The intention here is to be mindful of thinking, to get quiet enough so that you become aware that thinking is going on. And then there's some choice in relating to thoughts, because some thoughts are incredibly useful, and many thoughts actually perpetuate moods of anxiety and tightness. So an image that's helpful for me is that I imagine flying in an airplane, and that when we're lost in thought, we're inside a cloud, and that's our world. Our world is the thought. And then when the airplane continues and moves outside of the cloud might still be there, but we become aware of like this vast world that we're part of. And so in the moment of being mindful of a thought, noticing, oh, thinking, you're inhabiting an awareness that's larger than the thought. And just in listening to the question, whoever asked it, is you're noticing the planning and the worrying thoughts. And that's the first step. And it's really important just to notice, oh, there's a lot of worrying going on. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of fantasizing, whatever it is. So a couple of tips in terms of increasing the power of that mindfulness, because it's such a huge tug to get lost inside the thoughts. And one is to practice noting, just to name it. You can either mentally whisper, you can even whisper it out loud. Okay, thinking, or worrying, or whatever it is. There's a lot of research now about the power of notation, of noting, that it really activates the prefrontal cortex. And so there's a more integrated brain, and you get less caught in the limbic system, which keeps driving the thoughts. So another tip is, when you notice you've been thinking, to become aware of your senses, become aware of sounds and sensations and feelings, and that'll help to ground you in a larger reality than just the thoughts. And the third one I really want to emphasize in terms of being lost in thought is just start getting really curious about the difference between what it's like when you're inside thoughts and this living reality, when you kind of wake up and realize the thought, but you then open up to everything else. Just to get curious about the gap between the thoughts. So this training of attention, it'll give you more and more capacity to notice when you've been lost, and to actually have choice in your life experience, because you don't have to follow every train of thought that is hurtling through. Yeah. So, Jonathan?
Well, there's a particular kind of pointing out instruction that I got years ago that I found helpful. I'm not sure everyone would, but it's sort of that noticing the moment when I'm aware of a thought, and it's like noting the inner reactivity. And either it goes towards some form of like chastising myself, like judging myself, like, oh, you lost the anchor again, or like, how long have you been thinking? The intense self-judgment that can come with it, versus learning how to associate a sense of like pleasure in the waking up.
Mm.
It's almost like a mild celebration, but it's like, how can I associate pleasure to waking out of the trance of thought? And part of the pleasure, just kind of reflecting back what you said, is like when I can come back into the senses and completely relax, it can be an intensely pleasurable thing. And I find that to be helpful. At times, I just find that to be really helpful when I realize, like, oh, I'm back. I can relax my tongue. I can feel the weight of I can feel the sensations in my palms. It's that difference between kind of judging and celebrating the fact that I'm awake again, if just for a few nanoseconds.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind as I hear that is I notice for myself, often when I'm waking up out of thoughts, if they're anxious thoughts, what I'm waking up into is a more actual raw sense of unpleasantness. But as you say, there is some sense of celebrating because I'd rather be more directly in contact with reality than in reaction to reality and pulled away, because now I've gotten familiar with the fact that if I can come into my senses and my body, even if it isn't pleasant, even if it's not relaxed the way you described, it's more the truth of what's happening. I have this confidence that that actually creates the deepest happiness, which is this freedom of being able to be with life as it is, that I'm not avoiding something. So I love the way you're framing it, that on some level we can celebrate being more awake every time we open up out of a thought and into a larger reality.
Yeah, and Dr. Huberman, talks about, part of like being a discipline is like finding pleasure in the challenge. So when you're kind of coming to the edge, you're maxing out some muscles to actually associate pleasure to it. Like, this is really going to benefit me. It's unpleasant now, but it's really going to benefit me. I remember being on a month-long retreat and once again, waking up out of the trance of thought, and just this little light came on that said, this is training. I'm training my mind. And there's something kind of juicy about that. We're really reminding ourselves that this is a practice of focus and then refocus. Like something's happening inside that can be tremendously beneficial, even though it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reminder that more than anything, we want to be fully who we are. So any way of evolving, even when it has edginess and unpleasantness, the evolving itself is really gratifying.
Well, here we are continuing right along this theme. The next question, they're just kind of lining themselves up here. How do I know when I'm meditating when to pay attention to thoughts? Sometimes my thoughts seem so creative that I'm having meaningful insights.
It's a great question, because it's true that the more we step out of autopilot, the more we're actually present, then the habitual patterns of thinking shift, and there's actually room for more creative and potentially insightful thoughts. So there's actually a type of meditation that is explicitly dedicated to cultivating that kind of thinking. It's an intentional way of contemplation. And um, the way it's practiced is, first you do take some time intentionally relaxing and quieting the mind. So there really is a quality of full presence. But then into that presence, you drop in an inquiry. What's the nature of impermanence? What does it really mean to die? What are the roots of suffering? What arouses love? What really brings freedom? You ask questions and you kind of drop them into that open presence. And so you are paying attention to the thoughts that arise, and you might even journal. So that's a whole part of meditation. But I want to say that that's different from the formal training of mindfulness, which isn't fighting thinking, but it's, as we've been describing, it's to notice it and then relax open and rediscover the larger space of awareness that thinking's happening in. And then to rest in that larger space so that thoughts can be there, but we're not identified. And so I do want to reiterate that that's invaluable. Contemplation's a really useful thing, but it's invaluable to get the knack of waking up out of thoughts and sensing, oh, that was virtual reality. This is larger than our thoughts. Our thoughts are always symbolic. They're pointing to reality. So when we open up out of thoughts, we can rest in that reality. And there's one of my teachers, when I say my teachers, one of the spiritual masters that's most influenced me, he's been gone for a long time, Sri Nisargadatta, has a quote I love. And he says this, he says that the real world is beyond our thoughts and ideas. He says we see it through the net of our desires, divided into pleasure and pain, thoughts of right and wrong, of inner and outer. But to see the universe as it is, you must step beyond the net. It's not hard to do so, for the net is full of holes. So yes, there are creative thoughts, insightful thoughts. There are times to dedicate to exploring them and to not miss out on the radical freedom of waking up from thoughts so that we're living in a larger truth.
And there's something really interesting around, this practice of Vipassana, something's called insight meditation, so every now and then we experience something that's beyond the linear rational mind. We're outside the frame of this, finite mind, and we see some larger reality, and here's this amazing insight. And I know for myself, I get kind of attached to the idea of having more and more insights, And I remember once being on a retreat and just thinking, okay, well, what's the anatomy of an insight? How do I make an insight happen? Of course, as I contemplated, it was like, relax and receive, let go of the desire for anything other than what's here. That's the anatomy of an insight. We can't make it happen. All we can do is kind of create the most optimal space. And part of that includes just noticing thoughts and realizing that we are not our thoughts. And it's such a fascinating dance because the doorway through to seeing beyond thoughts is really just that falling back into presence, falling back to be the witness. A little more on thoughts. Here's a question. I keep getting caught in the same obsessive cycling of thoughts. How do I stop them?
It's pretty much everyone I know has seasons of obsessing, if not seasons, ongoingness. And if you think of thoughts as repeating visitors, and some of them are really intrusive, it's a sign that something wants attention. When I have certain thoughts that just keep coming, it just means that there's something under the thought. There's some roots to the thought that are asking for attention, some fear of falling short, or maybe a hurt in a relationship. And it'll keep cycling through until I pay attention. And not only that, as it's cycling through, they affect how we then engage in the world. A repeating thought that's fear-based, it affects how we approach our work, our relationships. Let's say I have the fear that someone let me down. I'm going to be defensive and blaming in my behavior. Many are familiar with that sequence of that our thoughts end up creating our words, which create our actions, which lead into habits, which create character, and our character creates our destiny. So it becomes really compelling to attend to the patterns of obsessive thinking wisely. And the reason is because mindfulness can interrupt the cycling of thoughts. If you notice, and the way it happens is when you notice that they're there, let's say, I'm going to fail, or this person betrayed me, attend to the emotion underneath, the roots. It's like that story many of you might remember of, a wise sage, and people would go great distances to get his wisdom, and he'd have them do some meditating, and he'd swear them to silence, and he'd ask one question: what are you unwilling to feel? What are you unwilling to feel? And I have found that inquiry so powerful. When I have repeating thoughts, just say, what am I unwilling to feel? And if I then bring curiosity and kindness, sometimes it's fear or hurt, we can discover whatever is more raw underneath. And if we can meet that with acceptance and with kindness, we can begin to pull out the roots that are continuing to have those thoughts just keep reappearing. So that to me is the most basic approach to obsessive thinking. Just pause. What am I unwilling to feel? And come into the body with kindness. Jonathan?
Yeah, well, as you know, one of my standard jokes is that, until I started practicing yoga, I thought my body was there to make my head portable, and for me, because I'm pretty much a head-oriented person, is just recognizing like every thought has a corresponding resonance in my body, and just as like thoughts, lead to speech, lead to behaviors, lead to character, lead to destiny, beneath that is this felt sense, that there's this whole play of feeling tone that is intimately connected to that thought. And when I can be with that and trace that back and ask myself certain questions, for example, if I'm obsessing on something and a lot of worry, come in contact with that, locate that. Sometimes to ask myself, how old is this? Quite often that can lead to a very rich investigation where I'm moving from that obsessive thought itself to really tracking it inward and tracking it through time in many ways. It can be a very powerful practice for me.
It's so true that if we can get in touch with the felt sense, it begins to unwind it, and sensing how long we've been living with it. Another thing I've noticed is that, especially when people come to retreats, because they are spending more time waking up out of thoughts, there's this revelation that's life-changing, which is, I am not my thoughts. I don't have to believe my thoughts. And that is so empowering. If you can have a thought that has been kind of commandeering your psyche, and on some level say, this is just a thought. It's a soundbite, it's an image. I am not my thoughts, I don't have to believe this. There's a huge freedom that opens up to be with this life in a very fresh and creative way.
Which so organically glides right into the next question, which is about our relationship to ourselves. This is a question about judgment and self-judgment. Tara, you talk about not judging ourselves. But if I don't judge myself for what is wrong, how else am I going to change?
In a way, when I hear that question, it brings up a question and response, which is, have you found judgment helps you to change? Let me start with, there's a real difference between wise discernment, which sees, the ways that we or others are causing harm, which sees what needs attention. So that's wise discernment. And judgment that actually has a quality of aversiveness in it. When we're judging, there's a quality of condemning, rejecting. And for the most part, we seem to lean more towards judging than wise discernment in the way we move through life. And often when I'm doing workshops, I'll do a reflection and I'll ask people, what's stopping you from holding yourself with kindness or accepting yourself as you are? And it's just what came up in this question. It's the fear that, well, if I do that, I'll never change. I'll get worse. I'll really, be condemned to being the bad person that I am. And what that shows is that, and this is for all of us that have a harsh inner critic, that harsh inner critic is trying to help us. I mean, it's trying to help us be the person we want to be. But because it's fearful, it has a sense that there's something bad going on, and it makes us feel bad. So that's the trouble with judging, is it has an aversive quality and it locks us in a feeling of badness. And I often think about, it's just the most amazing little sentence from the American psychologist Carl Rogers. He said, "It wasn't until I accepted myself as I was that I was free to change." That the acceptance in the moment of who we are, to not add that badness, is the precondition to change. So I can just speak personally that, watching myself over the decades, that in the early days, I had a very, very harsh inner judge and judged me for being selfish and for being irritable, for being, not coming through the way I thought I should in relationships, for compulsively overeating, the list went on. And I could see over time that my habit of judging deepened my sense of badness, which then fueled the very things I was judging. And I think you all know what I mean by that. So I could see that suffering. So I dedicated, my meditation was very much in part a dedication to unwinding judgment, and started with self-judgment because I really did want to be kinder. But just to be clear, I still wanted to change the parts of myself that wise discernment showed me created suffering. So I still wanted to change and grow and evolve, but I didn't want to do it through aversive judgment. In the deepest way, I wanted to accept myself as I was. So I'd find myself judging myself, and this continues. Judgment is still in the wiring. Let's say in more current times, judging myself for being selfish in my relationship with you, Jonathan, just sensing a judgment come up. And then my practice now is to pause, to deepen my attention, to sense what might be driving the selfish behavior, what kind of feelings of fear or tightness or hurt or whatever it is that's judging that, what kind of habits of behave, how the habit gets driven, and also sense the pain in being selfish, just the pain of it, and feel compassion towards myself. I'm putting my hand on my heart because it happens a lot that I just see myself coming from a tight place and saying, oh, okay. And if I can arrive in a more compassionate presence, I still care about growing, and I'm much more inclined to be less selfish the next round. And it didn't come from aversion, it came from presence and care. So the most important thing, I guess, about this is that self-judgment deepens our sense of personal badness, which then sustains the very things we're judging. So, Jonathan, I'm here publicly saying that I accept all the ways that I'm selfish with you. Any comments? Do you accept it too?
Thank you. I accept it. No, I was once with a with a group, and I asked this question. I said, raise your hand if you've ever looked in the mirror and judged yourself. And I was surprised by the amount of laughter, because then I asked the second, who's ever looked in the mirror and just thought, wow, you look amazing. We have such this built-in negativity bias. And I think there's something that's so powerful about by recognizing, I think it was Werner Erhard, it said 5 billion people thinking they're unique is not unique. That we just look through this lens of so much self-judgment, and recognizing that that's the nature of the filter through which we naturally perceive, has been certainly helpful for me. Which brings up an exploration of another question that has to do with you could say maybe the antidote, which is the loving kindness practice. And we got a couple questions on loving kindness. And here's the first question. Loving kindness meditation is really hard for me to do for myself, because it brings up so much self-judgment that I don't deserve care. Anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah. Loving kindness can bring this radical healing of the heart. And on the way, it can be challenging. And first to say, a loving kindness meditation is any way of paying attention that softens and opens our heart towards ourselves and each other. So it's a very broad category. And especially when we're trying to open ourselves to ourselves, we have, most of us, the conditioning to relate to ourselves the way our caregivers related to us in some way. So that means for many of us, it can be to neglect ourselves or ignore ourselves or judge ourselves. I mean, so many have internalized the message that we should be different and we're not okay. And I'll share with you, because I just came upon this somewhat recently. I don't know if I shared this one with you, Jonathan. This is a cartoon of a psychologist and a dog, which is a setup for a lot of cartoons. Anyway, and the psychologist is saying, it's not that you're a bad dog. You're a good dog doing bad things. And I love that, because it doesn't matter how it's framed, we still take the message of I'm bad, And so, okay, we begin some practice of loving kindness where we're in some way trying to offer care to ourselves. And it can feel like we're going through the motions, like really mechanical, or that we're faking it, or even more painful. It just shines a light on the ways that we really don't like ourselves. And I think probably many of you know what I mean by that. It can bring attention right to where we feel most wounded or bad. So one friend, I'll share her experience because I thought it was really inspiring. This is Shauna Shapiro, who's an author and a teacher. And when she was in a process of getting divorced, she was filled with self-judgment and shame. And her meditation teacher suggested she do the loving kindness practice. And she said, how about every day you say to yourself, good morning, I love you, Shauna. It's a little bit like, Jonathan, your thing of looking into the mirror, just every day, good morning, I love you, Shauna. And she said, no way, And then it got adjusted. How about good morning, Shauna? And just put your hand on your heart. And she said, okay, I can do that. So she does it for a couple of months, and then she goes back and her teacher says, okay, it's time for the advanced practice. Good morning, I love you, Shauna. And she did it the next morning, and she could do it, but nothing happened. There was no sense of love or warmth or anything, but she kept it up. And one morning she did it. She had her hand on her heart, and she felt her grandmother's love and her mother's love and her own love, and her heart softening. Whatever you practice gets stronger, So if you're practicing loving kindness, it takes time, it takes patience. And here's the most important thing. Every one of us has to design our own loving kindness practice. We have to, experiment, customize, and just find out what works. it often centers on finding some message of self-care that touches us, that in some way gets dropped in, and it in some way brings care and comfort. And so it's a helpful inquiry just to ask your own heart, what do you wish for? What is the wish you have for yourself that feels most meaningful? Just ask that. What's the wish that feels most meaningful? What do you most long to experience? For some people, it's, may I accept myself as I am? Just really want that experience of accepting themselves and just offering that prayer is like a caring offering. And another might be, may I touch peace and ease? Or may I feel joy? Or may I love without holding back? There's just different wishes. And shifting the message if it needs be to keep it fresh. For myself, any moment that I in some way send the message, trust your goodness, and I'm pausing to kind of do it in that way, there's a kind of sincerity that comes up in me that is tender and relaxes me. Just trust your goodness. So what I'm hoping to convey, loving kindness isn't like a cognitive affirmation. It's deeper than that. I mean, some of you might remember that story of the cartoon with a dog that's in a bed and he's sleeping with this headset. And the words coming through the headsets are, good doggy, you're such a good doggy. Aren't you a good doggy? Yes, you are. So it's not that. It's not like you are a good person. It's more trust your goodness. And maybe you can feel the difference in that. And I'll just say a few more tips because this is an area that feels so potentially powerful in healing us, is that if you want to explore the loving kindness practice, begin by just sensing your intention, that your intention is to awaken and open your heart, just knowing it matters to you. And, if you're shut down and it's really hard to offer your self-care, just bring to mind somebody that you love and trust and just sense them offering you care. It helps to sometimes start the loving kindness practice by remembering other people you love that are easy to love and feeling your love for them. Just may you be happy. And then become aware of your loving, because that'll put you in touch with your goodness. What really wakes up loving kindness is getting in touch with goodness. That is the key. Whether it's waking up care for yourself or care for another, in the moment that the eyes of the heart see goodness, we get tender. So if you remember your love for another person and then just sense that loving, you'll sense the goodness of that loving and start feeling more care towards yourself. Also reflect on other qualities that you appreciate in yourself. Sense what you most care about. If we get in touch with our deepest aspiration, we can sense the goodness of that. Or maybe see yourself as a child and remember, just the innocence and the joy and the curiosity of being a child, or sense your future self, where there's a more free flow of wisdom and love. So there are these different ways of moving our attention to come home to sensing goodness and being able to then offer some care. And when you offer care, and this is important, do it a few times so you're really feeling sincere. You're feeling sincere in the midst of it. And, as you offer it, sometimes helpful to have the hand on the heart, to feel your breath at your heart. And then imagine what the words mean. So if you're saying to yourself, may I be happy, or may I feel happy, then imagine what that would be like. Imagine it. And you might do it for a moment right now. Just sense a wish that resonates. Something you'd like to wish for yourself. and then offer that wish and feel the sincerity of your offer. And imagine the manifestation of what you're wishing. And know that what you practice grows stronger. The more that you're seeing your own goodness and offering care inwardly, the more you'll be resting in a place of open-heartedness towards yourself.
So I think perhaps we have time for one more question before we close. My 14-year-old struggles with low self-esteem. When I suggest therapy, joining sports teams, anything, he gets angry and he feels helpless and feels like he's failing.
I'm glad we're doing this question because I'm so aware, especially currently, of the teens, our teens, the low self-esteem and the pain so many teens are in, anxiety, depression, and it's getting worse. I mean, that young people are like the rest, older people are addicted to social media, and there's less real contact that actually helps our hearts be happy. So the starting place as a parent of a teen who's struggling is self-compassion, because it's so hard to have someone you love struggling. So just take the time to just feel kind towards what you're experiencing, because your response to your child, to your loved one, will come from a more wise and awake heart place if you first offered care inwardly. I mean, I remember some years back, a couple parents came to talk to me because their son in his early 20s was living at home, was completely disengaged, not working, hated himself, withdrawn. And, they had suggested therapy, which he didn't want to do. So they're just saying, well, what can we do? The wife saying, should I send white light? They're wondering, should they be setting boundaries, forcing him to work? So I asked them a question. I said, it was kind of a reflective thing of, well, tell me what you love about him. What do you most appreciate? So I'm basically asking them, tell me about his goodness. And they listed it, which included, his amazingly creative guy, incredibly kind, generous, funny and fun when he wasn't completely oppressed as he was now. And I could see as they shared that, their hearts open. So I said, this is your meditation right now. Every day, just meditate on his goodness and let him know what you love, let him know what you appreciate. And I saw them a few months later, and there was just so much more openness and warmth and lightness in relating. And an opportunity had come up for him to volunteer doing, I think it was digital engineering or something, sound engineering, which he took on. And then he was going to sign up the next semester for community college. So I share this story because there is such power in being a mirror of goodness for each other, such power in it. And so it doesn't mean we don't look directly at where our teens are struggling and find a way to work directly with the pain. It doesn't mean that we don't do what we can about our society in terms of social media and the atmosphere our teens are growing up in. But it means that individually, we make it our deepest intention to remind them of what we love. I always think of Arne Gorborg, who wrote, to love somebody is to learn the song in their heart and sing it to them when they have forgotten. Yeah. So Jonathan, mirroring goodness, just anything you want to share?
Well, I'm not a parent, but I was a teenager. And I'm just aware in my own life, and certainly with those that that I'm with, that so much of our pain comes from some identified unmet need. And I think, and I'm imagining as a parent, to really ask yourself, what are you hoping for? What is it that you're wanting? To investigate and to be with that. And certainly when we're with others, to open up that question is a very powerful way of beginning to move beneath, the surface behaviors to really sense what is it under this that is needing some attention. What is the unmet need? What are you hoping for? What are you wanting? That can evoke certainly a vulnerability, but also a lot of tenderness that goes with it.
It's such a beautiful question, because if we look at somebody who's hurting, lonely, low self-esteem, and we ask ourselves, well, just to think of that person and sense, what do you need? Where does it hurt and what do you need? So often what we get is they need our loving and some reminder of their goodness. And maybe to close in that spirit, all of us together, since this is so pervasive, to take a moment to reflect as we close. And you might bring to mind somebody in your circles, family, friend, colleague, who's having a hard time right now. You might bring them to mind and close in. And as Jonathan says, just to ask that question, just imagine you're talking to them and their inner selves and saying, well, what do you need? What do you most need? And you might sense the quality of loving that they need, and perhaps even imagine with that person, letting them know something you appreciate about them. Being an active mirror of goodness. And imagine what it would be like for them to take it in, to hear your offering. Just sense the field, the heart space that opens up, the healing that becomes possible. And so, friends, as we close, just to sense this wish that we all might be mirrors of goodness and remember our own. And I want to thank you for joining us. And Jonathan, thank you. This is just it's a total delight to be able to do this together. So blessings to all.